Welcome to part 2 of my Di2 upgrade project video series, where I'm taking my giant TCR road bike with the older Shimano Ultegra Di2 11-speed and upgrading it to the latest and greatest semi-wireless 12-speed Ultegra Di2. In part number 1, I went through all the components that I've chosen. I then configured it all here on the bench and had it working. Today, the fun begins. But before the fun begins, we need to remove the older group set off the giant TCR. And because I've been watching a lot of Colin Furze videos, you're going to get some high-speed, hard rock, fast motion bike wrenching in the next 66 seconds as that takes place. And with that, go! And done. 66 seconds and the power of the internet to get that bike fully stripped back, minus the fork, the headset, the stem, and the handlebars, which remain unchanged for this project. Now there is a lot to get through today, so I have marked this video with chapters down below if you want to jump ahead. But what's coming up is hydraulic brakes install and bleed, the Di2 battery installation and the wiring install. Yes, there's still wires to deal with. Front and rear derailleur installation, bottom bracket install, the crankset install, which I am using the Shimano Dura-Ace R8270P. Disc rotor installation, 12-speed cassette installation on an 11-speed HG Freehub, which they are compatible with. I'll take you through the full process that I use for the 12-speed chain waxing from out of the packet into the hot melt wax and onto the bike. Then it's on to tuning the gears with the limit screws and the B-tension tool they provide. And lastly, I go over a few final touches with the build. So yes, there is a lot to get through today. Let's get straight into it right now. Firstly, to set up the hydraulic braking system and resizing the new brake hoses using the old hoses as the correct length, because they were, and the new ones are now, after using the TLBH62 to cut those hoses and press the barb in. On with the brake calipers using standard tools for now, torque wrench later on, just to get those set in place. And the hoses routed through using the Park Tool IR 1.2 internal cable routing kit, one of my favorite tools when working on bikes. Okay, there's not a tool that'll grab the hose, so a little bit of tape does go a long way and allows me to pull the hose through with the Park Tool wire. And after a little bit of fiddling, it is all good. Front brake a little easier, no internal routing with that on the giant TCR. So brake caliper on, zip tied to the fork. Yes, it's a little bit ugly, but this is the 2019 Giant without the internal cable routing. Connection grommet on and everything nice and neat. Levers on and back to the marks that I'd put on the bars with texture before taking the old levers off. The T-handle wrenches that I'm using are the Feedback Sports T-handle Allen wrench and torque set. You can see them in the background there, a little bit blurry, but that's how they come in the set. And in with the hoses, and an 8mm wrench, and then the torque wrench later on. Okay, first up we'll do the bleed of the front brakes to get rid of all the air bubbles using the Shimano TL-BT03-S road brake bleed kit and the funnel adapter with O-ring. And this really is a simple task with the new setup. Squeezing, bubbles come out, that's what we like to see. Squeezing till we see no more bubbles. And that's pretty much it. Very simple. Close off the valve, disconnect everything, clean it all up, a few squeezies, and we're away to go. That's as easy as that, which is also making sure there's no leaks there. Out with the brake block, in with the brake pads, split pin in, and we're good. Rinse and repeat for the rear. Yes, here in Australia we do have the rear brake on the left. That's just how things are. And again, out with the brake pads, in with the brake bleed block. And the exact same procedure as we saw before. On with the hose. Opening up the valve. A little bit of squeezy. A few bubbles come out. And we keep going back and forth until there are no bubbles. Close off the valve. A few squeezies again. And making sure there's enough squeeze in there. It's not too soft and not too hard. And once that's done, out with the bleed block. In with the brake pads again. And split pin. Back to the lever to remove the oil cup. And install the top cap back on. Tidy everything up, and we are done for the hydro system. Easy as that. Onto the battery replacement, pulling out the DN110. It's mounted in my seat post. Comparing it to the DN300, which they look very, very similar, but they are incompatible. So in with the DN300, using the giant seat post specific wedge, and all sits in there pretty tight. Good to go. Back into routing cables again, because this group set is only semi-wireless. And I got the rear derailleur one in, no problems at all. The front derailleur cable, which will go up the seat post, will require some internal routing help with the Park Tool tool. And there is no end cap for the new Di2 wire, so out with a bit of tape to pull that up through the seat post. And I have both of those cables threaded through the top. Just using a bit of Velcro tape here to make sure everything won't rattle around. Installing those into the seat tube or bike frame, and all good to go. Tucking everything up here with a few anti-rattle cables, which look a lot like cable ties. Just making sure everything's not going to rattle around when I'm riding along. So making a complete mess of that and shoving it all the way up. And okay, we are good. Seat post on with the torque wrench onto the front derailleur and setting that in place. For now, getting the cables hooked in. Now there is a little corner cable adapter that goes in for that, which pushes straight in pretty easily. There's also a frame brace, which I'll deal with later on. Pushing it into the grommet, making sure it's all neat, and then onto the rear derailleur. Again, temporary install before snugging everything down with a torque wrench later on. This is just to make sure the cables and things hook up. Cable on, grommet in, brace adapter on, and good to go. Okay, so we had everything paired on the bench in part one. You can simply press the buttons and we're getting happy sounds. Good to go. Next up, onto the wheels manufacturing bottom bracket, which is a thread together bottom bracket, not just a straight press fit. So hopefully eliminating any creaks. I've used one of these on my other TCRs with great success, so that went on very, very easily with the correct tools. With the bottom bracket now in place, it's time for the crank set, and I will be installing the new Durace R9200P power meter, which does require a frame magnet. Goes on pretty easily there with a little bracket. Crankset goes straight in. And the installation of this is very straightforward. On the non-drive side, 2 pinch bolts. This little securing bolt just here is a little different, having to push the electronics out of the way. But as you can see here, everything else remains the same. Once that electronic component is clipped in, we snug those down as per spec. This is a power meter after all, so we do this one right from the get-go. Cap on. Job done for the power meter. Rotor installation doesn't really require any grease, but I like to keep things absolutely perfect and smooth, so a little bit of grease means everything goes on nice and smooth, and also comes off nice and smooth too. So 160 on the front, 140 on the rear, snugging that down nice and tight. Then it's onto the cassette. Again, a little bit of grease on the HG Freehub, which is compatible with 12-speed Shimano road cassettes. Sliding everything in there. Again, a little bit of grease just makes it perfect. And away we go. Wheels done. Without going too deep down the rabbit hole on this one, this is my chain prep with 4 bottles of mineral turpentine, 2 bottles of methylated spirits, and the chain which we need to strip off all that packing grease from. The mineral turpentine on the left there looks a little dirty. It is recycled, so I do run those through a few coffee filters, so it is good to go. And as you can see, as I move over to the right, it gets a little cleaner. So for the first one, it's a lot of shaking, and then leaving it for a few hours before taking it out, and rinse and repeat, literally, for the next one. And the next. And the next. And once all those are done, I dry the chain, and then it's 2 cycles through the methylated spirits as the final prep. As well as, once that's done, putting it in front of a nice warm heater to make sure everything is totally dry, ready for the immersive wax. Now, with no expense spared, I've gone with the Instapot, which is quite expensive, to melt the Silca hot melt wax. Now, it won't be just this bike I'll be using for this. It'll be pretty much all my bikes now. Going from the drip wax over to this now, using the drip wax between hot melts. Took about 10 minutes or so for that to liquefy. And we're good to go. Now that was taking way too long to cool down, so I've removed it from the Instapot and just left it there in the pot to cool until there was a surface forming on top, which I believe is the indication that it's time to pull that chain out and let it cool down and the wax to stick to the chain. Now while I'm at it, let's do the quick link as well, because why not? Leaving that for a few minutes to cool down. Alligator action there before making my own escargot from the chain, which means it's ready to go on the bike. Rule of thumb for chain resizings always served me well. Big on the front, big on the back, not routed through the rear derailleur, and +1. Using a quick link there, we're good to go. Snapping that one off with the BBB BTL 55 chain rivet tool, which is 12-speed compatible, and kind of struggling to thread this through the rear derailleur. The wax is quite stiff initially. It needs a ride for about 1 kilometre or so before that gets into play. And quick link, always easy to do quick links like this. Boom, done, good to go. And the final tuning is with the limit screws on the rear derailleur, making sure the highs and lows don't go too far. And the bead tension template they give here is very, very handy, similar to what SRAM use. And from there, everything was ticking along, literally still ticking along, because with all that hard wax built up on the chain, I did need to go out and ride for 1 kilometre or so to get rid of all that wax built up on the chain before doing the fine tune, which didn't take too long on the bike to really dial in nicely. And here's what it sounds like after the first ride. Absolutely silky smooth gear changing. And into some fine tuning, just making sure everything is torqued down correctly. A little grub screw there pressing up against the frame to brace the front derailleur up against the derailleur mount. Rechecking the B tension after the chain can move a little bit more freely, and making sure those disc calipers are correctly spaced with that handy little tool. And everything is torqued up to spec. And with that, here is the finished product. Well, finished for now anyway. The 2019 Giant TCR Advanced Pro Zero disc with the new Ultegra 8170 12-speed semi-wireless group set. It's a bit like Grandpa's Axe or the Ship of Theseus, because not much on this bike is the original spec. Now, I didn't set out to make a how-to guide for the upgrade, just what I got up to for this upgrade project for part 2, putting it all together. The how-to references that I used throughout this entire build were, number 1, the Shimano technical documentation, which is absolutely brilliant, and, as always, the best site on the internet for anything Di2, bettershifting.com. Links below in the video description for both of those websites. And with that, stay tuned for part 3, where I'll have a chat after a few rides about the ins and outs, the ups and downs of this new semi-wireless Groupset upgrade. Thanks for watching. Oh,